Hey, you may have noticed, although it's not up on the screens yet, but you may have noticed if you opened up the online, the YouVersion Bible event, that we're kind of switching gears a little bit for the summer. I generally like to switch gears up a little bit in the summer, and so we are. And so, you might think, did Jeff just not do his laundry? Because I usually wear like a shirt with a collar. It's just because Jeff just going informal. But my shirt, if you look at it, it says "Choose wisely." And rock, paper, scissors. And it really kind of fits with what we're talking about. And we're going to be talking about some proverbs. Now, there are common American proverbs. Maybe you're not used to using that word, but you can lead a horse to water, but don't put all your eggs in. Don't count your chickens. There's more than one way to. Which is one I tried to research because I'm like, what the heck? Why are we doing this? Anyway, strike while the... You guys are good. A bird in the hand. That was for Julie, She'll take pictures of it. I actually almost, for the graphic, I almost used an owl just for you because wisdom. Don't make a mountain out of a... It's always darkest. The early bird gets... the early worm gets eaten. I'm just saying, for those of you like... a stitch in time. Yeah, so we all kind of instinctively know Proverbs. You may not think these are Proverbs, but they're sayings. And why do we have these sayings? Like, why do we say a stitch in time saves 9? Why don't we just say preventative maintenance and fixing small problems eliminates large problems from happening later? That would be just as easy, right? It's not as memorable. It's not as pithy, if you will, which we'll get to some proverbs that are pithy, which is a fun word to say. And some of you didn't know pithy was a word till today, and some of you still aren't sure, and you're going to be Googling it later. But, we don't just say what we mean. We have these things because they're memorable, and then they're often then applicable in kind of different circumstances that we have. And so what we're intending to do with this series in Proverbs is going through some of the life lessons that we find in Proverbs. And here's the thing. I have some that I want to hit, but I always leave room for, this is kind of like, remember those Choose Your Own Adventure books? Did you have those as a kid? My parents tricked me into thinking reading was fun. Which it is. It's awesomely fun. But I used to read those Choose Your Own Adventure books, and I loved it because you could kind of choose, and I would figure out how to get different parts of the book from the different. And I was nerdy. That's okay. I still am. I love the smell of a good library book. And some of you get that, some of you don't. But this is kind of like the Choose Your Own series, if you will, and I'll post something on Facebook. You can shoot them to me on text or email. If there's proverbs you like, man, I really like this one. Or maybe there's a proverb you've read and you're like, what in the world does that mean? Because every once in a while, does anyone have a Bible verse or especially a proverb they read and they're like, what is this about a dog returning to its vomit? And you're like, so if there's one you want to kind of contribute, I'll post something this week. You can post them, we can see them, but if you can also shoot them to me. We can choose your own adventure for the summer as we hit some of these. But I'm kind of going to start in the first proverb because I really think it kind of sets things up. Now, I've told you time and time again, I do like to pick things up and put things down. I do like to lift objects. I don't know if you've noticed. But it's funny because I'm also about the biggest nerd you'd ever meet. I'm like a sort of this weird tension of things because I'm the guy who, I learned this in college that, before class started, there's a college tip. This is wisdom for you who are maybe going to enter college or things. I would read the preface of the book. I would read the first chapters and everything, and I would try to get an understanding of where the author's coming from before I even went to class. That's nerdy. Now I'm at the point where I'm reading the publisher. I'm reading all kinds of things. I'm reading the book reviews. I'm researching people that gave book reviews that I don't know. I'm reading things in the footnotes. I'm reading the footnotes of those footnotes. And, but you kind of want to start from the beginning. And so the preface of a book kind of gives you the point. And so this first proverb will set us up to what the idea is, what they're trying to do here in Proverbs. So Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1. It's right after the Psalms, the Psalms. I think it was last year we did the Psalms. My life has just been a blur. Anyway, ever since like 2020 and the pandemic, I don't know what year it is. I don't know how old I am. I don't know, what we've done. Anyway, so if anyone else is feeling that way since 2020, it's like a blur, isn't it? Of course, I'm also getting older, and everything starts to be a blur. I'm a little long in the tooth. Anyway, so Proverbs chapter 1, it's right after your Psalms. So if you open up right in the middle of the Bible, you hit Psalms, go a little to the right. Or to the left if you're reading Hebrew. But you probably know how to find it if that. Proverbs 1:1 says this, starting in verse 1. These are the Proverbs of Solomon, David's son, king of Israel. Now, if you kind of have been around church a while, you maybe know who these people are immediately. You've heard of Solomon. I've told you my Hebrew teacher called me Shlomo, which I was thought it was a terrible Hebrew name because they gave you Hebrew names when you got into class. Ever do that? They give you and I thought Shlomo sounds terrible, but it's actually Solomon. So I'm like, okay, I'll take that. Sorry if your name's Shlomo. I always thought it was does that mean I'm not fast? It's Shlomo. Anyway, but Solomon is Bathsheba's kid, which that's a whole other story and thing that we've talked about. And he takes over the kingdom for dad. And there's all kinds of drama behind that. If you read the book, oh my gosh, his brother was going to take over. There's all kinds of people involved. There's some drama in that family. There's enough drama, and then there's his mama. Anyway, but as Solomon takes over, he does all these elaborate things and everything. You can read about it in 1 Kings. But as part of the thing, he prays, and God kind of shows up and goes, hey, what would you like me to give you? Now, if God appeared to you in a dream and asked, what do you want? Most of us would think about what? Money. Win the lotto without playing. People give me tickets once in a while. I'm like, this is your chance to bless me, Lord. But maybe blessing is not winning. So, you might ask for money. Maybe a long life, health, all these things that may be sort of the selfish things you might want, right? Solomon asked for wisdom. And then we read in 1 Kings, it says, so God will reply, because you have asked for wisdom in governing my people with justice, and not asked for a long life or wealth or the death of your enemies, because that would be another thing we'd add, right? I will give you what you asked for. I will give you wise and understanding heart, such as no one else has ever had or ever will have. And then I'll also give you what you didn't ask for. I'll give you that other stuff. And so Solomon is known for his Proverbs. So he doesn't necessarily write all of them, but he collects the ones that he believes are true. And so pulls these together. And Solomon, if you read, he starts ruling with wisdom, right? Now, this is a story, it's funny, because I don't know how I missed this growing up, but there's this story, and it's funny because after you know the story, it shows up in pop culture and everything. There's even a Seinfeld episode with a bicycle. Some of you are like, holy, you don't watch TV? Okay. I just watched Seinfeld the one time. No, I'm kidding. And so there's this story that gets paralleled in culture. And so these two women come to him. They both had babies. And some of you know this story. You immediately know where we're going with this one. And so one of them, unfortunately, is sad, rolls over on their baby at night. The baby dies. And so she wakes up, takes the other woman's baby, kind of like roommates or something. And so then like the woman wakes up, she's like, oh, my baby. And she's like, this isn't my baby, that's my baby. And this is like before DNA tests. This was before, yes, you are the mother, like a Jerry Springer kind of thing could happen. This is like before you took like baby fingerprints and footprints. There's no pictures to kind of compare or anything. So maybe the baby looks similar to mom's like, hey, this isn't it. And so they bring the babies there. And so, Solomon's like, okay, so let me get this straight. Both of you claim the living child is yours. Each says the dead one belongs to the other. And he goes, okay, bring me a sword. And then he said, cut the living child in two and give half to one woman and half to the other. And the woman who was the real mother of the living child said, oh no, Lord, give her the child. Please do not kill him. And the other woman said, all right, it'll be neither yours or mine. Divide in between us. And the king goes, what? The mom's the one, who's do anything to save her child, right? And so it was kind of when you read that story the first time, one, it sounds crazy because you're like, what sword? What? But he creates a test that shows his wisdom. And so, Solomon, again, he's this wise king. He doesn't always take his own advice. He has some problems if you read his story. Doesn't always do things, but these proverbs are written down. Now, why are they written down? Again, it says right here. It says their purpose, verse 2, is to teach people wisdom and discipline, to help them understand the insights of the wise. Their purpose is to teach people to live disciplined and successful lives, to help them to do what is right, just, and fair. And so wisdom, discipline, successful lives. The Proverbs are given to us so we can live well. Many of our problems in life could be avoided if we listen and do what we find in the book of Proverbs. I've often said, I think it's a misunderstanding of Romans 8:28. One of the things actually there's a movement online for it, so I'm not the only one, but I hate the expression, and I'm sorry if you've ever used this, and I usually will kind of hold my tongue if it's an awkward situation, but I hate the expression, everything happens for a reason. Because I think that's a misunderstanding of Romans 8:28, which, and God, and we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. So I do believe God uses everything for good, but I don't, some things, everything happens for a reason. Sometimes it's because you're unwise and make bad decisions. And so sometimes things go wrong because we do dumb stuff. And I've got enough scar, like this scar, you guys notice my thumb there? It finally fell off, not my whole thumb, but I was plastic welding, which I learned on the internet in several minutes, so I was pretty sure I was an expert. Anyway, so blowtorch plus thumb equals bad things. So everything happens for a reason. It's because I'm dumb sometimes. I walked out to meet somebody who was wearing shorts. If you ever seen me in shorts, you know one thing. My legs are scarred up all over, and people are always like, what happened? And I'm like, I wish I had like a cool story. I'm just like, lots of dumb things, to the point I can't even remember where all the scars come from. I've told you how many times I've climbed up deer stands that weren't connected and fallen into my garage and all kinds of things. But, sometimes things happen because we do dumb stuff. But if we learn to follow the wisdom Solomon gives and other places in the Bible, we learn to live our life in a way that things will work out better when we do things God's way. One commentator says it well. I like how he said this, because I was reading what people said about the book of Proverbs. It says, the book of Proverbs teaches you how to live skillfully in every area of your life, including family, finances, friendships, speech, and work. So it addresses all of these things. It tells us how to live, and it gives us principles that if we follow them, life will be better. Now, sometimes things can still go wrong, but these are general life principles for this is the way God has designed us to live. I've often used the example of, your car. Now, most of you have a vehicle. I have lights on that are constantly on. I know which ones I can ignore. I'm going to fix one with a piece of electrical tape later because, the sensors are more expensive than the car I own. So a little black tape over it, you'll forget that TPMS thing. Some of you know what I mean. I know how to fill my tires. I don't need a sensor to tell me it's low. I look at them. Anyway, and so, but I know there's certain things, like when my little light comes on, because now I don't have to remember it. A little light comes on when it's time for an oil change. And what should you do when you get the little light for the oil change? Change the oil. Because if you don't, what happens? Car no go. You need a new one. And so there's wisdom in living things the recommended way. And so God has designed us, he's given us life, and he's given us a way to live, and so we need to live by that. Later, the same author writes, "You were not born with wisdom, nor do you automatically become wise as you grow older." Some of us need to hear that, because I know some people who are older who aren't wise. I know a lot of older wise people, and we love, when someone was sharing in our men's Bible group, man, there's some wisdom there. We love that. But just because you're older, it just means you didn't die. It doesn't mean you necessarily grew in wisdom. And so you want to be, though, the kind of person who, as you grow older, you've learned, hopefully from some of the things you've done, but also from living a wise life. The source of wisdom is God. Wisdom is gained through disciplined pursuit. There's a disciplined pursuit to gain wisdom in life. I coached wrestling for years. I probably loved football better, but I was more successful in wrestling. And wrestling was easy to kind of coach all the time. So even when I was in college, I'd come back for the summer, I would run the open mats, and I'd come home, on break, I would come drill and work out because I needed it, but I also, it's part of passing it on. And then I coached for years just because I like being around the sport. I enjoy just coaching and everything in general, and it was fun. I like kids. And so, it's interesting because there's times when, and I've been around the block enough times now. I mean, this last year, every coach had been on a team that I was involved with. That's how old I am at this point, that even the head coach who retired was on a team that I'd helped coach. Then you're old, right? When anyway. And so I love coaching, but one of the things that's funny is often you see kids coming up and you're like, this kid has what it could take to be a superstar. They're fast, they're strong, they have good technique, and you kind of see that natural talent. And people, especially when they're younger, make these predictions. Oh, that guy's gonna be a state champion. And I always try to be encouraging, but in the back of my mind is, we'll see, because not everyone has a diligent pursuit. Things get you off track. Girls get you off track, jobs get you off track, and suddenly you find these kids who were great, probably could have been great, but didn't necessarily do it. And I think you'd find the same with music, right? If you're naturally gifted at music, but you don't apply yourself, you never kind of quite rise to that level you could, right? And it's the same with academic stuff. There's people who are smart, who kind of know how to do stuff, but if you never go to school and apply yourself, and you never work through things, what happens? You never really reach your full potential. There has to be a diligent pursuit of things, and that's how wisdom is. If you want to live the way God's called us to live, there has to be this diligent pursuit of the way God wants you to live. And then you'll grow in wisdom. It does take time. Just reading a book of Proverbs won't give you the skill you need for life, but a disciplined life of working to understand and apply these can be life-changing. Now, when I think about that, I think of a similar line of thought when Jesus says in Matthew 7:24, it says, "Anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes and torrents and floodwaters rise and winds beat against that house, it won't collapse because it is built on bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and the floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash." And so we have to hear the words of Jesus. Now, we spend a lot of time talking about Jesus. It's funny, I know I'm the most disorganized looking person. I go in my office, though, this week I cleaned it. It got so bad, I took time to clean my office. But, I'm sort of like, I don't know, the haphazard kind of, but if you go into my notes, they're color-coded. And I actually put the words of Jesus in red, because they should be read. Dad joke in there. But no, I put them in red because it helps me pop out and find my way through my notes, because I am a little ADD too. But, every week nearly, I got red in my notes because the words of Jesus are so important. And whenever I kind of like, hey, where should I start reading next to the Bible? I'm like, I'm always turning back to a gospel, right? Because they're the words of Jesus. They are the words of life. If you want to know what God's like, if you want to know what God thinks, if you want to know things about God, read the words and the actions of Jesus. And so I'm constantly turning back there. Now you can hear the words of Jesus. You can memorize them. And this comes in the Sermon on the Mount, which I love. Sermon on the Mount will wreck you. It wrecks me all the time because it's really this pinnacle of what Jesus is teaching, the summation. And there's some parts in there that will convict you if you're not living right. But you can memorize the Sermon on the Mount, right? Anyone memorize it? I didn't either. Just make you feel like you're, maybe I was smart. But you can memorize it, but not live it. And we all know people like that, right? Who kind of know the Bible verses. They know the things to say. They know when to shout hallelujah and amen. but they don't live it out. And so Proverbs is this wisdom of learning to live it out. It's the same thing Jesus was saying. You have to, not just memorize things, but you put it into practice. And Proverbs helps us do that. Jesus says, listens to my teaching and follows it. Wisdom requires action. Faith requires action. We have to do something with it. It's not just something we have in our mind. It affects the way we live if we want to honor God. I like how the Message says this, and I know every time I read this verse, I bring the Message up because the Message is it's a paraphrase. It was by this guy named Eugene Peterson, who was awesome. You should, listen to the interview with him and Bono, and, just an incredible dude. And just really kind of a dude full of wisdom. I wish I'd kind of gotten to know him, but, he was a pastor over in Maryland. I'm like, why didn't I, anyway. But he says this. He says, these words, this is the way he's translated. I speak to are not incidental additions to your life, homeowner improvements to your standard of living. They are foundational words to build a life on. It's not just updating your bathroom a little bit. Like a lot of us like to do, decorate our houses and stuff, right? Anyone like to decorate? It's okay. It's not a bad thing, but and it's nice to create a welcoming home that people can come into. That's great. It's not just expanding your kitchen. It's not just new vinyl floors or paint. These are foundational. Now, I've told you a lot about the foundation. When the tornado came through, some of you kind of followed the saga of Jeff's never-ending stories about, building. We had a carport we were building into a garage. I dug down footers that were really deep. I filled them with concrete and everything. I built a portal frame so it could withstand wind and everything. And we didn't have the garage door on yet when the tornado came. But you know what? My garage was still there. I mean, there was a tree that came straight down this way, and there was one that speared the house, but the garage itself was there. Now, my next door neighbor had identical carport. I pulled it off the next neighbor's house because it was on top, because it didn't have the right foundation. The carports are just kind of stuck there. They can't withstand the wind. And so the foundation is important. The foundation of our life are Jesus' words. The foundation of our life is the way God tells us to live. And so there's this exercise. We talk about reading the Bible. We talk about, immersing yourself in Scripture. It's not just, again, reading the words, because I think that does change us, but then how we live it out. Are we going to do these things that God calls us to do? We all build our lives on something, whether it's intentional or not. Our culture speaks things to us. It tells us this is how you should think. This is how you should live. This is how you should be. And you have to decide, am I going to live that way or not? And a lot of times we get influenced more by our culture than we realize. Now, most of you know I'm from here. I'm as from here as you get. Except for my great-great-great-great-grandmother that they hung in Boston. That's how we ended up down in Pennsylvania and down here. And you can read it. It was on Voice of the Martyrs the other day. I'm like, hey, I know that lady. It's my family's been here for generations. And so I am as Delawarean as you get. Although I've worked to not say water, roof, any of the other, Delaware words, people are like, you don't have an accent. That's I've tried my whole life not to have an accent. because, my ambitions were bigger. Anyway, so when I moved, I moved to Pittsburgh, then we moved out to Los Angeles. We were living out in Los Angeles, and I thought those people were nuts, right? And I get out there, and I'm like, man, first time you pull up to a freeway, it's like 6 lanes. You're like, what in the world? I'm from Delaware. Like 2 lanes is your big road. I don't even think 95 was that big back then. I don't know. I never drove that far north usually. And so it's like, I remember, I was more of a southern Delaware, slower and lower. That's who we are. Pig farmers. Right, sis? We marry our cousins. Anyway, I lived in Los Angeles. I thought they were nuts. They drove crazy. And then it was like, I'd lived out there for a couple of years. I'd moved to Maine. And I remember driving down the freeway, and I'm like, woo, woo, woo. I was like, I think it was 295. I'm making my way to get to, I was leaving work. I'd been downtown. And I suddenly realized, why am I driving like this? Like, I live in Maine. But I'd started to drive like a Californian. And I was in such a, I remember I pulled over to the right-hand lane, slowed down, and never sped up again. Because I'd realized the culture had affected me. And so when we look at Proverbs, we look at the way God would have us live, because we tend to build our lives on what's around us. Our family, what we see on TV, all these things. But when we build our life and our actions, to build on how God would have us to live, not just our feelings, our culture, philosophy. And so verse 4 says this. It says, these proverbs give insight to the simple and knowledge and discernment to the young. Let the wise listen to these proverbs and become even wiser. Let those with understanding receive guidance. By exploring the meaning in these proverbs and parables, the words of the wise and their riddles. We live in a world of information. I have in my back pocket this amazing device. I can access, with this device, all the information in the world. You know how amazing that is? I went to high school. I remember my dad got his first cell phone. It was wired directly to the battery of his car. I think it cost like $80 a minute to use. It was for work. In fact, my dad left his cell phone in his car for years because it was like the car phone. He's not here today. I can tell you dad stories. But it's amazing. We have these devices. We can access knowledge, right? Now, we mostly post cat memes and argue with strangers on them, but that's a whole nother thing. But we have this device that can do these amazing things. It can access knowledge like never. And there's an expanding amount of knowledge. I like trivia. I can hardly contain the knowledge I read, right? There's all kinds of articles and things you can get and read. There's all kinds of things that happen. And there's so much knowledge. Now, and so there's knowledge, like knowing all the stuff, how things work, but there's wisdom, which is more kind of how you apply it. So I think wisdom is not knowledge, but it involves knowledge and understanding and putting it into action. Wisdom is a skill to apply the right knowledge to the right situation. Now, knowledge is, I like this example, because knowledge is knowing I should wear a bike helmet. Some of you know I bike not like vroom, vroom, like Drew bike. I pedal, pedal. I should make a rap for that. I pedal, pedal. Anyway, I pedal, pedal. Now, I know I should wear a helmet. And if you've ever seen the number of flat tires I seem to get, a few accidents, that's why we call Mark T-Bone, because he T-boned me. I've learned that it's a good thing to wear. So knowledge is knowing I should wear a helmet. Wisdom is wearing the helmet. It's putting the knowledge into practice. It's not just knowing, what I should do and how I should live, but actually doing it. And so wisdom has this idea of we apply it. One definition of wisdom, I like this one. It says it's the skill of doing life. It's a skill. It's not that you'll know everything, but you learn principles on how to live. And Proverbs are general principles for successful living. In other words, how to navigate life in a way that's pleasing to God and beneficial for us too. Because again, when you change your oil, the engine lasts longer. When you metaphorically change your oil in life, things last longer. Your life will be better. insight to the simple, knowledge and discernment to the young. When we reflect on his wisdom, we can learn to navigate life properly. Now, the funny thing about, again, I'm going to talk a lot about coaching wrestling. I don't know why, it's just on my mind. I guess that chapter's kind of behind me now. But the funny thing about wrestling is a lot of things feel natural that are really stupid. And it's fun when you're a more advanced wrestler and someone does like, oh, I should probably reach back. And you're like, ba, crush your spine, I will pin you. There's some things I would do, like, especially if I knew the less experienced wrestler, I would do some things, like I would tempt them and bait them to do something dumb. And they'd think, oh, this is a good idea. I'm like, no, that's a good idea for me. Because a lot of our natural instincts wrestling are wrong. And so you learn to kind of cut off some of those natural instincts, and you learn the proper responses because it'll be more fruitful for you. Moves that worked in middle school don't work in high school sometimes. You have to learn to sort of be a student of wrestling to excel in it. And you have to learn to be a student of wisdom in order to excel at life. Look at the way things work, the way God's designed them, so we can live well. Verse 7 says, fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. Now, fools. Now, I am a child of the 80s. So when I think of fool, I think, I pity the fool. I pity the fool don't know Mr. T. I pity the fool don't follow Mr. T on Twitter because he dropped some knowledge. You really should. If you tweet, you should follow Mr. T. He's entertaining. And he's a believer now, so it's funny. But I don't know why I don't have this poster yet. There's a poster, and it's Mr. T. It's like those 80s like motivational posters kind of thing, 90s. It says, fools, I pity them. Now, you might think, okay, Jeff's calling people a fool in church. Well, that's true, I am. But in the Bible, the idea of the fool is one who spurns wisdom in God's ways. So it's not just, someone wears a little jester hat, and that was actually one of my ideas for, when I was creating the diagram for today's sermon. One of them had like a jester hat and everything, because you think of fools, because that's a prevalent theme in the. You should see the number of subtitles I come up with when I'm working on a series. Like Denise and I are riding in a car. I'm like, so what do you think of? And I'm like, and I'm like, well, just look at the list. I'm driving. Because there's all these kind of ways to capture the meaning of things. But in the Bible, a fool is one who spurns wisdom in God's ways. It's one who kind of so it's not just some idiot. It's not just someone who kind of is silly, someone who messes with Mr. T. It's someone who intentionally spurns God's ways. And that's foolish living. Because ultimately, God is the creator, God is the judge. And so I think you kind of want to live the ways God's calls us to live, because that's the way we should live. It says, a fear. And we've talked about the fear of the Lord. Now, it's hard because I think if you come from a non-biblical thing and you think of fear, what do you think of? Shaking under the bed, turtles. No, it's kind of inside joke. Josh and I were coming out of the garage the other day, and some of you saw my post with the turtle, the fast turtle. I came out, and it was sitting right there, and I jumped. I've told you, don't jump. I kicked that turtle 35 yards. No, kidding. I did not. I love turtles. They're surprisingly fast. If you saw that video I posted, man, that thing was booking. And actually, it laid eggs now in the yard and everything, so we're kind of making sure no one, comes up and, takes them. No turtle eggs. Maybe we'll get you to, if we knew when they're hatching, we could have you set up and, but will you fight off the birds? Because I know you love birds. I don't know. Anyway, but I was startled by a turtle, right? But you think of things that startle you, maybe something you kind of have this terrified of. Now, and when, in the Bible, when angels show up, people are always terrified. It's like, they're always like, first words they say is like, fear not. Why? Because they be fearing. And so there is that terrifiedness, but I think of, when I think of healthy fear, I think of, and you all know I love big-headed dogs, Rottweilers. I love a Rottweiler. Anyone have a Rottweiler? I want to come hug your Rottweiler today, pet their giant heads. They're beautiful dogs. But that dog can also kill you. You know what I mean? Like, my friend had a big, giant dog. I would not enter his house until he was at the front door. I didn't care if those dogs knew me. I didn't want them to eat dinner. And so there was a healthy respect for the Rottweiler. Because its power, it's under control. And there's the Chronicles of Narnia, and there's the quote, and I've said it before, but it's like, Aslan, the lion, is representative of God, and they're like, the one character says, are they safe? Are they safe? They're like, oh no, it's a lion, it's not safe, but he's good. And so there's this respect that we need to have for God. And I think sometimes because we've grown up in this culture that emphasizes, I think, we are a friend of God, there's this personal relationship with God, all true things. But sometimes we lose the fear of God, in that we should be, infinitely concerned about how we live our lives. And I think it's funny when people are like, oh, well, I can't worship a God who believes this or does, would do that. And I'm like, well, when you create your own universe, you can run things your way. We don't have a choice in who God is, but we have a choice in how we respond to him. So it's a fear of the Lord that is, and I think maybe kind of term it, because I think fear kind of gets us in the wrong direction. It's this awesome respect for God. And so that is, when you're talking about wisdom, fear of the Lord is sort of the starting point. Now, anyone ever a treasure map when they were a kid? I always thought, again, it's one of those things I thought in my life I would find more treasure maps than I do. Because there's always treasure maps and quicksand, and you're thinking these are adult things you deal with all the time. And I've told you before, when you're planting a church and you have absolutely no money, you're just praying God will provide. And one of the ways I provide, I'd be metal detecting down at the beach, and I'm like, Lord, gold coins in the name of Jesus. I mean, if you want to bless me, now's the time. And people are always like, what do you find when you're metal? I'm that guy now at the beach, metal detecting, especially when the kids were little. They're like, what do you find? I'm like, God, just gold coins mostly. And, they're like, what? And I'm like, no, old Matchbox cars and quarters. But it's like, if you have a little treasure map, what do you have to do? Yeah, but you kind of have to start at the right place, right? Because if you start anywhere, when that X marks the spot, it's going to mark some other spot, right? You have to kind of know where you start. Or if you go through the mall, remember when we had malls? Do we still shop in malls? I think there's still one in Christiana. Anyway, but you go to the mall and there was you'd get lost in bigger malls. Not so much Dover Mall. I don't know who can get lost in the Dover Mall. But you have those maps, right? And I always get lost at Christiana Mall. I'm always like, you are here. And then I have to kind of imagine myself there. They won't let you put the thing down and stand on it, trust me. But you have to, what? You have to know where you start. Because just a map of something is not helpful if you don't know where you are. So the starting point for wisdom is this fear of, this awesome respect for God and his ways. Because you won't know where to go until you know that. God's word is the starting point for knowing and understanding him and his will.